Hello again, risk community. Welcome back to another video tutorial to help you get started and make the best of ServiceNow. My name is Eric Ferron in Santa Clara, California. Joining me today once more is Scott Ferguson, Director of Product Management for Risk. Hi, Scott. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Eric. Always enjoy spending this time and looking forward to our session today.
So, Scott, the world is going through some very unusual events that have great impact on us all. ServiceNow has done great work to help customers through these challenging times with the release of some very useful apps. And of course, businesses around the world themselves have put in place mitigation measures to adapt to this new context and to continue performing. Today, you will show us how the GRC applications can help businesses in their adaptation journey.
You're exactly right, Eric. There's been a lot of change in the way that businesses function. Probably the one that is foremost on everyone's mind is the fact with the stay-at-home orders is everyone's now remote. Before we'd have everyone in offices, now everyone's at their home, and it doesn't take too much time on a conference call for you to see that it's different, right? We're not focused in conference rooms and we're at home, and many times you'll see children run in or a cat or a dog run through and disrupt the meeting. People are working from home and there's an impact on productivity, and it's just natural, and we get that. But what that means is that risk of loss of productivity as an example is something that, or how does an organization address that? And so what we want to talk about a little bit today is there a way for a ServiceNow GRC tool to help you manage that type of risk efficiently. So we'll also talk a little bit about business continuity behind once you get through this whole process that we look at, and then we'll touch a little bit about some other things that you could do to help in these uncertain times.
All right, let's get started.
Awesome. So, when we use that example that we were just talking about, yes, there's a whole lot of thing and everyone needs to stay safe and stay at home and stay healthy, and that's all important. But business has to continue. And with this remote workforce, you've got risks like the loss of productivity as an example, but you also have some other things, right? I've seen examples of where companies have told their employees to just take the assets home so that they could take their home office and turn their home office into their work office. That introduces risk to an organization where, do I know where all of those assets are? Do I know that I'm going to get them all back? Right? There's a lot of new risk introduced to an organization in this particular situation. Maybe they're also using some of their own devices at home. They're using a home printer to print off documents that may have, if you're in healthcare, patient data or financial data, or if you're in another industry, maybe intellectual property information's being printed at home and then maybe put into trash cans and going out on the curb, not being in the destruction boxes that you would have in an office. Just the nature of bring your own device and we're using those devices at home exposes an organization to the loss of confidentiality of data. So if we use as an example the loss of productivity, want to dig into this a little bit further, how could we address that, right? So we've got this new situation, everyone's working from home. They're struggling to be as productive at home as they were in the office. Every employee is kind of experiencing this. That loss of productivity is a real thing that we need to address, right? And it really needs to be addressed by every department across an organization, addressed in an efficient manner. So how would we do this? We'll talk about it in a couple of stages. One, the control objectives you would use to mitigate that particular risk, how you're going to scope them with entities, the actual control instantiation of those objectives as controls with the indicators and test. And then you'll want to go through them in an iterative process from a crawl, walk, run. And this is the current state that we are in now, and we need to address this quickly, right? So if we use that loss of productivity as an example, a control objective that aligns to this, which is basically the activities, right, that are performed in an organization typically to make sure that you're aligned to an authoritative source, that you're compliant with a regulation, or that you're aligned to a policy. If you want some more information on that, there's some other great tutorials that are out there. But essentially, some control objectives would be make sure every employee has everything that they need to be productive, right? Do they have the right access? Do they have the right assets? Not only what are those control objectives that you just defined, but then who's going to be accountable for making sure that it happens, right? Is it going to be a particular contact or a particular stakeholder, right? So in that control objective, we want to say, here it is, make sure everyone has the right assets, they have the right access, and this is the person that's going to be accountable for making sure that it's been implemented. And then we have to define the scope, right? So we move to entities, and in this case, if every department is going to be an entity, in our example, the loss of productivity, right, we're going to say, well, every department, so customer service, sales, marketing, IT, right, are the departments, and the contacts are going to be those department heads. We define that level of accountability that says that department manager is going to be responsible to make sure that every employee in that department has the right access, has the right assets, has the right training to know that they're not exposing or making public information that they shouldn't. And now remember, a control is the actual instantiation of that control objective assigned to that responsible, accountable person to make sure that it gets implemented and that it gets followed up on. So here we have some examples of controls that can be assigned to a department head that says, and if we think about technology ones, do they have the right equipment? Do they have the right access? Have they been trained on data protection procedures about shredding documents or destroying them or not just setting them out on the curb? But more than that, there's also non-technical ones from an HR perspective. Do we have the right things in place to make sure that they have the flexibility for work-life balance, where they can spend some time in the morning, educating children that are now in a homeschool situation and not in the office? Do they have the right training in order to now use pieces of technology that maybe they had in the office and now they switch from a desk phone at the office to software on a laptop? These are all controls that can be assigned to that control owner, that department head, and then knowing, do they have all of the right equipment? Do they have all the right training? Can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. So we want to do something that's going to make it easy for them to be able to see that they actually have all of these controls in place and that they're working. And we're going to do that through something called an indicator. And a control indicator is a way for us to systematically or automatically leverage data across the platform, test the effectiveness of that control, and really to make sure and understand, is that control in place, is it compliant with what's going on? So let's think about it in the context of continuous controls monitoring. But if we look at it from the example that we're talking about, loss of productivity because someone doesn't have the right assets. So a control would be make sure that every employee has the right information to be able to work remotely. We can simply create an indicator, in this case, that says, go look at my list of assets for every employee in my department and provide that list of information back to me through this indicator for that control that says, hey, department manager, please validate and look at this list for every employee in your department to make sure that they have the right laptop. Or an indicator on the control around access that says, make sure that they have all the right VPN access. Or go look at HR data and make sure that they've completed all of the right training and provide that information back. So in this case, the department manager can look at that and make an informed decision and say, you know what, I need to actually get a piece of equipment and deliver it to one of my employees. Or we can systematically look at it and say, go look, and if someone hasn't completed that training, then automatically sign them up for data protection training, as an example, right? All of these are indicators that you could use to make sure that those controls are effective. Then once that's done, typically the control tests are used from an audit perspective to validate and prove to a third-party auditor or regulator that we've done what we're supposed to do. But you could also use these control tests to make sure that we performed well. Use a control test to say, you know what, I had all of my controls, I put them in place. After the fact, as we start to debrief on how that organization functioned and operated in these trying, kind of unprecedented times, we can look at that and say, you know what, I had all of my assets and I had all my access and all of my employees had the proper training. And we can use those control tests to say, did I have the process in place? Operationally, was everything there that they needed? And these control tests can say, let's make sure we get our assets back, and let's make sure that the VPN access was there and that everyone completed their training in a timely manner. And these tests are going to be used to ensure that we did all the right things along the way. That's a lot there, and you can think, I don't know that I want to undertake this huge effort to implement all of those controls. Well, prioritize some of the most critical controls. If I've got access to the training that people have completed, put that control in place that says, you know what, every single one of my employees need to have the right training to protect documents. And use the indicators. Just focus on that one and use an indicator to test that so that we can very quickly see where we may have some gaps. Or use that control to test inventorying all of those assets that may have gone out to employees so that we really know where we're at. Just prioritize and focus on those few. execute on them. And then as you start to gain that value, iterate, move to some of the less critical controls, and you'll find that you now have a better handle on things like, well, what are those controls that we've put in place to address the loss of productivity?
Okay, Scott, thank you very much. That's a great example of how GRC can be used to mitigate the risks in this new context. Now, this looks to me very much like firefighting. Can you tell us a little bit about how to get ready for the next time? Because there will be a next time.
Oh, there absolutely will, Eric. And that's a great question. So when you think about the situation that we're in now, and really business continuity plans are the first place that I would look. So most organizations, and there are a lot of regulations out there that require you to have various business continuity plans and IT, kind of disaster recovery plans or system recovery. But when you think about the business continuity plans, I think this time, this unprecedented event that we're living through, at least in my lifetime now, is one of those things where it's really testing the effectiveness of business continuity plans within organizations. Did they really have a good plan for how they were going to continue business when the disruption came? This would be, as we come out of this and business kind of gets back to what the new normal may be, it'll be a great time to take a look at those business continuity plans and start to update them to say, what lessons did we learn here? If I have to push all of my organization out to remote, do we actually have a plan to be able to support all of them? And I've heard from a lot of people where companies went to all remote and then they suddenly realized that their VPN was not able to support everyone being remote. That should have been something that they thought about from a business continuity perspective. What happens if there's a resurgence of this come this fall or next year? What we do in the aftermath of this may mean the difference between which companies make it through the next round. Then the other thing that I would look at, there will be, I guarantee it, some regulatory change, right? There's going to be changes that have to do with third parties and the supply chain, things that have to do with equipment and access to information. There will be regulatory change. So we need to take a look at what the impacts of those are going to be to our organizations. Do we need to start registering and looking at risk a little bit different? Are there going to be new controls that we need to put in place really to protect the organization? These are going to be probably the two critical things for us to look at as we come out of and recover from this event that we're living in.
All right. Well, I'm not looking forward to more regulations, but I am looking forward to a tutorial on business continuity. All right. We're coming to the end of the tutorial. What would be your guidance over what our audience could do and should do right now?
The first thing I would do is really to take a look at those controls that you've put in place, which for many organizations were focused on a different mode of operation. What are the entities, the controls? Prioritize and put a plan in place to maybe make a shift in those things that are implemented, especially on the ones that have an impact on the way that we're doing business today. Then there's some great other tutorials out there that, Eric, you've published around setting up entities and some of the other control objectives. I suggest we didn't go into a lot of detail of actually how to set them up in this tutorial. We were just kind of talking about them from a context of this event that we're in, so I would definitely check those out. I would also really start thinking about your business continuity plans, because that should be in the recovery mode once we're back in business and everyone's kind of back into the normal operation, is focus on those business continuity plans, because there's a great opportunity there for us to handle this situation better. And I would absolutely collaborate with your fellow GRC people by joining the GRC forum, right? There's lots of people out there asking and questions and posting content and communicating with one another. And I would subscribe to the GRC forum and engage in this particular community.
Excellent. Yes, please make sure you don't stay alone and isolated, particularly in those times. Join us on the community. There's tons of conversations going on, lots of experts, internal, external folks, partners, providing excellent advice and helping you through this through the GRC journey. All right, we are at the end of the tutorial. Scott, thank you very much for your time, for expertise. Thank you very much to the audience for listening. One last reminder, if you look in the slides, as Scott said, we have in places links to the existing tutorials on entities and controls. Strongly advised to look at these tutorials to really understand how to use the product in the best possible way. All right, until next time, Scott, thank you very much and goodbye. And to everyone, goodbye too.